Yeah, interesting list of ingredients too, because as you said, no probiotics, but it just seems like a lot of different, minerals here. There's purified water, chloride, sodium, lithium, calcium, phosphorus, sulfur, bromide, potassium, iron, antimony, zinc, copper, gold, magnesium, alanine, glycine, histidine, isoleucine, methionine, threonine, valine, a lot of minerals. So can you talk about?
Doug, I'm glad you actually read that, Meredith, because I've had some of my clients, they get the product and they go, "Oh, Doc, I'm already taking minerals, so do I need this?" I'm already taking minerals, so do I need this? So what do you say about that?
So it turns out that by FDA labeling standards, all labels are misleading, and they're interesting to read. So the only thing that I can put in the top box of that label is actually the active ingredient. And you just read what says ingredients, but if you go above that, the only thing I can put in the actual thing that says active ingredients is lignite extracts. Now, I've put lots of words in there because lignite extracts is the most useless term I could possibly put there. But that's the only one that the FDA could figure out what it was. So when you actually describe, if I put the actual molecular kind of description of the family on there, they think I'm a pharmaceutical company or something. They're like, that sounds way too medical. I'm like, well, it's biologic if you want to call it. Anyway, so we had to come up with this very lame term of lignite extracts. All that means is we're pulling the communication network, we're pulling the carbon molecules, these carbon redox molecules, out of soil. Lignite is just a layer of soil that's now a fossil. The reason we went after that has to do with the soil that we have on the planet right now. So we needed an ecosystem that was huge if we were going to get enough words. Something I hadn't mentioned is that each species of bacteria makes their own kind of 10 or 15 different versions of those carbon redox molecules. If you have 30,000 species, you now have millions of words at your disposal. But if you only have 7 species, you only have a very short vocabulary. And so we needed to find an ecosystem that was huge. Right now we're lucky to find a topsoil layer in the United States or elsewhere in the world that's deeper than maybe 12 inches. And so we have this topsoil, and that topsoil is really where life happens. The bacteria are there, the fungi are there, mycelium, all of this brilliant communication network that makes nutrients available and brings them to the plant root and everything else. So we needed some good soil. If you start really reading soil science, it's dismal. We don't have healthy soil on the planet right now. We are dumping 300 million pounds of glyphosate alone, that's the active ingredient in Roundup, into our soil in the United States every year. 300 million pounds, that's a pound for every man, woman, and child every year. That's twice as much as it was just 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Worldwide, 1.5 billion pounds of Roundup being dumped into the soil.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. But to finish out your question on where we got this, so we need healthy soil, and so the only place that we could go was back in time. And so if we could go before 1950, that would be great, because that was before we really started using a lot of these petroleum chemicals and everything else on our soils. But there's no way to get 1950 soil now. And so you got to go much deeper in. And so we started just basically going down through the layers. And so you're going to hit lignite at totally different depths depending on where you are in the United States and elsewhere. But in the desert is always the best place to go because the desert is the least likely of contamination of soil from the air. And so we went to the southwest United States. The lignite is actually very shallow in the desert because there's a lot less sedimentation being dumped on top of layers in a dry climate than if you're in a Virginia climate like I am here. So in Virginia we have lots of leaves and all kinds of compost happening just through natural process. Out in the desert, very little layering happening. So the lignite from 50 million years ago, pretty shallow. And that's where we've got this. This layer of soil is 50 million years old. If you know about sedimentation systems of rock, you know that it compresses. And so the soil compresses over 50 million years into a rock. And that mineral rock-like layer is 8 feet thick.
Wow.
Imagine how deep the topsoil was that compressed over 50 million years to 8 feet thick.
Wow.
If we had 8 feet of topsoil on the earth right now, we would have some of the best places in the world to grow food. There is one farm that I know of that has 8 feet thick of topsoil. It's actually up in Wisconsin, and I don't know if many of you probably use Standard Process products. Standard Process is one of the few supplement makers that grows all of their own ingredients. And they've been working on their organic soil for decades. And they actually have reached depths of almost 8 feet thick now with their topsoil. But now picture 100 feet or 200 feet of topsoil. What did the ecosystem look like 50 million years ago in that soil to produce that? Interesting, in that layer of 50 million year old of topsoil, you have all of the communication network preserved. That would not have happened if mitochondria were making those redox molecules, because mitochondrial redox molecules are so reactive. They're very highly oxidants or reductants, and they bond and they're gone. But when I was looking at that carbon backbone on these molecules, it was clear that these things could subsist. And so we started extracting through very old processes. Just mineral extraction has been done from old soils for mineral supplements for a long time. The thing is, we needed certain pHs and everything else to extract it, so we had to use a pretty unique system, but the concept is the same, where you're putting high pressure water or fluid through fossil soil or rock, and you're getting out substrate. And so that's how we just begin with our raw material, and then we bring it to Virginia. We make every single bottle in my laboratories here, and the interesting thing is the raw material, once it's out of the soil, you've got all that communication network sitting there from 50 million years ago. It's completely useless. It doesn't do a damn thing on the tight junctions. It doesn't do a thing to a cancer cell. It's totally inert. At that point, it's a mineral supplement. It has all of the minerals that you would see on the back of the label there. Those minerals are actually part of the issue, is that what you just read to us, Meredith, is basically the makeup of the skin of a sweet potato. Okay? And so all those minerals and amino acids you just read, that's a sweet potato kind of sitting there. But the process that happens when you take active, healthy soil that's making the sweet potato skin and then you let it sit for 50 million years is the ratios of those minerals and amino acids change. With that change, you start to change oxygen-hydrogen binding sites on all of the material in the soil, and you lose the active redox potential that's in that communication network. And so it wasn't too startling that, oh, okay, now we have a mineral supplement, but it's got no communication effect.
Yeah.
What are we going to do to do that? And I knew how to get that turned on because of my work in the mitochondria and the cancer world and everything else, as far as from a conceptual standpoint. But it was actually a colleague out in New Mexico who had a tiny little supplement production process going on out there. We talked to him, and he said, oh, I can get that immediately. And I was like, really? Intriguing. And all he had to do was add a number of other mineral substrates back in to get the ratios right. And once those minerals go back to living soil ratios, suddenly the redox system turns back on.
Wow.
And so it's wild. And so basically what we're doing is we're taking soil minerals and amino acids in different ratios and adding them to our 50 million year old soil, and suddenly life begins. And so this process it has to be pretty highly pH controlled and osmolar controlled and lots of different things to keep the oxygen hydrogen binding result. But once it goes active, the things are stable. And this was really exciting for us again, is because to have a stable redox molecule in a bottle is very challenging.